Last unit we worked with CSS tag selectors. This unit we will work with class and ID selectors and also talk about how to combine the different types. If you remember from last unit, we had a paragraph that looked like this, and we talked about how we could use a tag selector and we could change the way a paragraph looks. And that works quite well and is quite easy to do. No change to the HTML code, just add some CSS. That would apply though to all paragraphs. What if we wanted to make a change to just one paragraph? That paragraph right there, we might call an alternate paragraph. We have an alternate look for paragraphs. We cannot change the tag selector though and have it affect just one paragraph. That's where classes come in. If we look at our HTML, we do have to make some changes to our HTML. Instead of having just a regular paragraph like this, we have to add class equals alt, or whatever we want to name the class. Unlike with tags, we get to name our classes anything we like. That class is just another attribute for the tag, and then in the CSS, we could go ahead and make the changes that we want. So the differences there between a tag selector and a class selector are the names. We might have P for the paragraph, or alt. In the CSS, that is shown as being a class with that period at the front, .alt. The name of the tag is determined by the HTML standards. We have essentially no control over that. The class selector, the name is developed by the web developer, which is you. The tag selector is used when you want to modify all instances of a specific tag, say all paragraphs. The class selector, in this case .alt, is used for special cases when you have that one special paragraph or a class of paragraphs, they might be on the same page or multiple pages, that you want to have a different look for. We can also combine these. So if we have a combination, such as h1, h2, p, this will style h1s and h2s and p's, paragraphs. Say you wanted to change the font of those three, you could have one selector that changes all of those. You could also combine things this way, p space image. This will affect all images that are within a paragraph. It would not affect images within an H1, say, or within a table, or within something else unless it was within a paragraph. We have the class.alt, any tag with a class of alt. We could also combine that, p.alt. This will only affect paragraphs with the class of alt. If I have an H1 with a class of alt, that selector will not have any effect on it at all. We can combine spaces and classes, and if p.alt space image, this will affect any image in a paragraph with the class of alt. Or we could have p.alt space image dot border. This will affect any image with a class of border in a paragraph with a class of alt. As you can see, especially when you're getting started, this could seem a little bit complex, but as you work with it, it actually is pretty easy to work with. You begin to get a feel for how that works, and you figure out, okay, if I want to have borders only on images within paragraphs, this is what I want them to look like, and maybe I want my image borders to look a little bit different in my alternate paragraphs. I can make the selector this way. Still, I suggest trying to work with things to keep them as simple as possible. But there is more. Look at our paragraph again. We have our alternate tag. Now say we have some links. That is the blue text with the underlines by default. But maybe we don't want to have all of our links underlined. We want to have them with no underline. The only time we want them to have an underline is when we move our mouse over it, and then we get the underline. We can do that. And then once we have visited the link, it is then purple, which is actually the default, but again there's no underline. With this there is another type of selector. It is similar to a class, but it is called a pseudo class. It is mostly used with links, and for our purposes that's all we're going to be using it with. So I have a link that's an unvisited link. An example might be that link which is not underlined. A visited link, maybe purple. A hover, this is when your mouse is over it, and that might be a link with an underline. And a active, which is the link when you have your mouse down. You barely see this, but you might have that being red and where you can see the link that way. We have one more type of CSS selector, and those are IDs. The way those work is if I have my paragraph, the same one we've seen before, I might have a different attribute there. ID equals tagline, that's the attribute. An ID works very, very much like a class. The difference being an ID is one individual item. You could only have one per page. So you might have only one tagline per page. You would use that. We've actually already seen this. If you looked carefully at our anchors before, those actually had IDs if you look at the code. There was nothing inside the tag, it just had the attribute, but that allowed us to create a link directly to it. We're going to work with that this week also. If you remember from our site, we had at the very top a list item, and it looked something like this. An unordered list with each of the list items within there, each one having an anchor tag, an A tag, a link, and then some text. But what if I want to have more than just that one list? What if I want to have multiple lists on a page? Well, the top list, my navigation, has one look to it. My other list has a more standard look to it. Going back to our code, this is what it looked like. What we can do to make the list item at the top for our navigation look different is wrap that in what they call a div tag. A div tag does nothing by itself. It will not change the look of your code. It will not do anything. It is a block level tag that does nothing except act as a placeholder. In this case, it acts as a placeholder for an ID. I could set the ID to be nav, and then using my combination selectors, set it up so that I have UL and LI items that are only part of the nav. By doing that, we can have two different lists that have the exact same type of code, but look very different. The only difference being one is wrapped in a nav with an attribute, either an ID or a class, most often an ID. As a quick review, let's go ahead and look at our selectors. We have the tag selector, such as P. This is very common. It's used to alter tags. We have our class selector, such as .alt, to make an alternate look for a specific class of paragraphs, used not as often generally. We have IDs. Those are for unique items, either anchors like we've used them before, or some layout, which we'll get a little touch of this unit, and then we'll look at a lot more next unit. We also have our pseudo classes, where those are just assumed. I don't have to change my HTML at all. It's more tied to the state of the tag. Is my mouse over it? Has that link already been visited? And again, we also have our combos, which is used with multiple tags and tags within tags. Again, those are ones that we'll have to work with to get used to, but once we've worked with them a little while, I'm sure that you'll get the hang of it.